Y'all, things are starting to get interesting, to say the least, as you now have multiple areas of the US government saying that they are close to running out of money for Ukraine, and you have Congress in a position where they did not include new aid for Ukraine in the funding that was passed over the weekend in order to keep the government open. And there's not a sign at the moment that they have a vote scheduled and are planning to pass more aid. Now, do I expect them to? Yes, I absolutely do. But I think the fact that they kind of have this lapse right now where they're going through a number of things when it comes to ousting the current Speaker of the House and preparing more funding for a possible government shutdown that they are facing next month. Congress has got a lot going on right now, and so funding for Ukraine is not necessarily at the top of their list. Well, it is for some people, but not for people who are actually worried about the United States. However, you are starting to see those reports, like we saw one from the Wall Street Journal, which is warning that the US is getting close to not being able to pay the salaries of people within Ukraine's government, which is so funny because a lot of this just is not discussed, right? You don't talk about the fact that the US is literally propping up not just the Ukrainian military, but also their entire government. And then you also have reports from the Pentagon saying that if they don't get more funding, they're not going to be able to move forward with resupplying weapons and ammunition for the US because they have given their stockpiles to Ukraine, and that is their big concern there. So you're seeing a lot of these warning signs. And I do think that is notable. Obviously, you're going to get a little bit of propaganda thrown in there when their goal is to get more funding passed for Ukraine. Their goal is to get Congress to get on it and act. So that does make sense as to why that's happening. But it is kind of funny when you look at everything going on in the US Congress and the fact that there's just so much dysfunction there on their end. And so they aren't able to get it together for the one country that the Biden administration actually cares about here. Because if there's anything we've learned in this ongoing back and forth, it is that that is their top priority, not the country that they're actually supposed to be serving, but the one on the other side of the world where they're funding an ongoing proxy war there. That is the one that they're actually concerned about, and that they want to make sure that there is still funding there because that is at the top of their interest. And that's especially notable as here in the US, polls have shown that the majority of Americans do not support sending more aid to Ukraine. So technically, the members of Congress who vote for that and who continue to support it are going against what their own constituents want. Now, of course, that has not stopped them before. I would argue that they don't actually care about that at the end of the day, but it still is notable because you have a country here in the US where you're experiencing a lot of Ukraine fatigue. You know, these people have had it shoved down their throats for the last year and a half that this is the war we need to support. Now they're looking at a situation where the war is not going well, and you've got the American people questioning, why have we given this country, $113+ billion in a single year, and we don't have much to show for it? They're wondering why the people of Ukraine themselves are being forced into a war where there's no option for peace talks. There's no option for a ceasefire. That's something that the Biden administration still refuses to support, and the people of Ukraine are paying the price for it. Now, when it comes to this Ukraine fatigue, we're not just seeing it here in the United States. No, we're also seeing it a lot closer to Ukraine, playing out in Central Europe right now. Now, that is despite the best efforts of EU leadership to try to show that everything's fine and everyone is unified and it's all good, because that has been the line that they have really tried to pursue on their end, and it's not working out too well. And yes, I say that despite the fact that you had a meeting of EU leaders from 26 countries in Kiev this week. Why they went to Kiev, I don't understand it, but I guess for them it was a showing of support, that they were convinced that they were going to show just how much support there really is for Ukraine. So the EU foreign ministers went to Kiev to meet there, and when they were there, Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell talked about wanting to commit 5 billion euros through the European Peace Facility. Now, the fact that it's called the European Peace Facility in and of itself is ridiculous, but taking it a step further from there, the fact that he's committing 5 billion euros when he hasn't been able to get Hungary to unblock their veto from the 500 million euros that they wanted to give to Ukraine is also pretty hilarious on its own. But going back to that fatigue, it's a very real thing at the moment, and you're especially seeing it in a country like Slovakia. They just held a recent election, and the winning party there ran on no more aid for Ukraine. Now, they literally had a slogan of not a single round. And what does that tell you about a country that is in a position where they are sick and tired of this, so much so that it has literally become a winning campaign slogan for their election? That says a lot at the end of the day. And of course, you're looking at a country like Slovakia, a country that, if the war in Ukraine continues and it expands, Slovakia is right there in the crossfire. And that's also why you've seen countries like Hungary be very critical of this anti-Russia narrative all the way through on their end. You know, Hungary, since the very beginning, has refused to give in. They're also the ones who are blocking the 500 million euros from that good old European Peace Facility. And there are a number of reasons for that, but among those is their placement, just how close they are to the whole conflict, and their realization that to expect to just cut everything off with Russia for the foreseeable future is not a good strategy for Europe. Now, another country in Europe that is experiencing this fatigue is, of course, Poland. Now, I don't say the Polish government, I say the people of Poland, because you have a lot of people there that are sick and tired of the influx of Ukrainian refugees, sick and tired of all of their country's military hardware being shipped over to Ukraine, and of all of the endless support for Ukraine. Now, I did a video about this previously, talking about the current Polish government kind of acting out and calling out Ukraine on a number of issues when it comes to the grain deal and when it comes to just this ongoing back and forth that they've had over military support. And I got a lot of comments from people that were saying, no, it's just about Poland's election. That is the main reason why this is happening. And I think I'll have a point. We do have a Polish election coming up on October 15th. And so I do think it is very likely that the current government in power is getting concerned about the opposition and the ways in which they have tried to really ramp up this claim that, similar to Slovakia, they are going to put new measures in place to stop this, what is essentially a blank check for Ukraine in their own version, right? Because the United States will send over plenty of money, but Poland is a country right there bordering Ukraine that is actually taking in refugees by the thousands, and that is having an impact on their country there. So I do think it is fair to say that a lot of this is just preparing for the election, and that we'll have to keep an eye on what the Polish government actually says and does after that election and how that ends up. But it does serve as a reminder that the people of Poland, the people of Slovakia, the people of Hungary, the people in Central Europe who are having to deal with the brunt of the war in Ukraine, even though they're not in Ukraine, those are the ones who are really feeling this ongoing fatigue that we're talking about. So you have these issues going on in Central Europe, but then across the pond in the United States, you have Joe Biden hopping on a call yesterday, reportedly, with G7 and NATO leaders and basically promising that the US commitment to Ukraine is not wavering, that nothing is changing there. But yet, when you look at the US Congress, they didn't approve more funding. They are now in a situation where they just ousted the House Speaker. There's a lot of back and forth. You've got an impeachment inquiry being launched into Joe Biden himself. You have a lot going on. It's almost hilarious to hear Biden calling up other leaders and saying, hey, we're still committed. I promise, we're still here. We're with you. And at the same time, the US has also pushed EU countries into a position where they have to rely on the US because their other ties have been cut off. When it comes to Europe reducing their energy reliance on Russia, they did that because that was what the United States told them that they needed to do. They complied. They were good little puppets on that one. So much so that when the Nord Stream pipeline was destroyed, you had Germany just kind of shrugging it off and being like, okay, on to the next thing, when that is a massive deal. I mean, it's still insane to me that it has been 1 year now and there still is not more talk about that, about the impact that it has had on Germany, on all of Europe, on their economies, on their energy infrastructure, and of course on the environment. So where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us in a very interesting place, we'll say, where you've now got the US warning that it's running out of funding, it's running out of arms, and you've also got the UK warning that it's running out of arms on its end. So it'll be very interesting to see how the politicians and the warmongers come together and what support they're able to get, because after over 1.5 years of this now, we get to the point where people are fed up. They're over it. They're asking, what is the end game here? And as we've seen with far too many cases of US foreign policy playing out, there is no end game. I mean, look at countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, just to name a few. There is no end game there, right? At the end of the day, the US is happy to invade countries, support government overthrows like it did in Ukraine, and they're not nearly as worried about what happens to that country, what happens to the people there. And from everything that we've seen in Ukraine, from the way that the people are being treated there, from the way that they're being forced to continue on in this war with no option for peace talks, from the way they're being pushed into what is essentially a meat grinder with tens of thousands of their men being sent to their death in this war that Ukraine knows it's not winning. The US knows it's not winning. Europe knows it's not winning. It's just insane to see that there are still politicians who still support this war continuing on as if they have some sort of an end game, which they don't. And they especially don't now that things aren't going well for them. It's all easy to fundraise and to make sure that your special interests are taken care of when things are going well and you can make it look like you are accomplishing something on the battlefield. But if there's anything we've seen from this year and what the mainstream media here in the US is admitting to, it's that things are not going well. Ukraine is not getting back the territory that it wants. It's not forcing, the country back to its borders of the 1990s. Zelensky is becoming more and more of a dictator, and now even the US is getting sick of him. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this one, and certainly when it comes to looking at what politicians are doing, it seems as though their true interest and what they truly want out of this conflict is becoming more clear now than it ever has been before, and that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, be sure that you're subscribed to my channel on Telegram. That's t.me/RachelBlevins, and take a minute to join my group there where you can find all of the latest breaking news and updates. I'll talk to y'all soon.